Welcome to this Research Union Insights Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the actual science and the structure behind building transformative educators all across the globe. You know, if you've ever looked back at that one phenomenal teacher who totally changed your life's trajectory, you've probably wondered, how did they get to be so good? Well, spoiler alert, great teaching doesn't just happen by magic, and it definitely doesn't happen by accident. It takes a highly structured, scientifically backed, and continuous system to build an educator who can actually handle the incredible complexities of today's modern classroom. This authoritative briefing, brought to you by Research Union Insights, challenges a super persistent, kind of old school mentality. Historically, we've treated teaching like a destination, right? You get your degree, you get your certification, and boom, you're done training. But what the data synthesized by Research Union Insights shows us is an undeniable fact. Effective teaching is absolutely not a static skill. You don't just acquire it once and call it a day. It is, in fact, a lifelong continuum of constant learning, adaptation, and growth. Now, to truly understand the stakes right now, we have to look at one singular, staggering number. The world is going to need 69 million additional teachers by the year 2030, just to achieve basic quality education for everyone. I mean, let that sink in for a second. 69 million. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the entire population of the United Kingdom needed purely in teaching roles over the next few years. The scale of this global shortfall is absolutely massive, and it's literally impacting the economic and social future of nearly every country on Earth. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The Global Teaching Challenge. 2. Rethinking pre-service education. 3. The Power of Practicum. 4. Teaching for Inclusion. 5. Continuous professional development. And finally, 6. A lifelong learning continuum. All right, let's dive right into our first section, the Global Teaching Challenge. As we just mentioned, the sheer volume of need globally is staggering. Take Tanzania, for example. They need to hire over 130,000 primary teachers just to hit a 1-to-40 student-teacher ratio. This intense level of desperation really forces education systems into a corner. It forces them to fast-track hiring just to get a warm body in front of a crowded classroom. But, when systems get desperate, the rigorous pre-service preparation that creates a highly effective educator, that's usually the very first thing to suffer. Quantity ends up completely overriding quality. Which brings us to Section 2, Rethinking Pre-Service Education. You see, the journey of an educator is really a multi-stage developmental pipeline. It starts with rigorous selection and admission, making sure the right candidates are actually entering the field. Then it moves into structured pre-service training and hands-on practicum. But here's the absolute crucial part. It does not end at graduation. The pipeline continues heavily into deployment, into the vital induction phase during a teacher's first year, and flows straight into continuous professional development. Basically, an educator isn't fully formed on graduation day. They're literally just getting started. Now, a massive point of failure in this pipeline happens when pre-service programs rely on traditional chalk and talk methods. In a lot of low to middle income countries, training is still deeply passive and theory-focused. We're talking mostly reading textbooks and sitting through lectures. But these future teachers are about to step into fast-paced, modern classrooms that demand active learning, high-leverage instructional practices, and highly inclusive strategies. These outdated lecture-heavy programs are, quite frankly, fundamentally failing to prepare teachers for the interactive reality of the actual job. Let's move on to Section 3, the Power of Practicum. So, a practicum bridges coursework theory with real-world application. But practically speaking, this is where the cognitive and emotional discomfort really sets in. This is that moment of sheer culture shock where pre-service teachers realize that managing 30 dynamic human beings involves a heck of a lot more than just knowing your subject matter. To process all this overwhelm, successful programs rely heavily on practices like daily journaling and peer discussion. These tools force new teachers to critically reflect on their own assumptions and, adapt to the utter chaos of a real environment in real time. But to make sure this hands-on experience is actually constructive rather than just, completely overwhelming, institutions have got to provide a few key elements. They need intentional placements in well-run schools where good habits can actually be modeled. They need strict minimum duration standards. Shadowing for just 2 weeks simply doesn't cut it. They require scaffolded, growing autonomy, allowing the student teacher to slowly take the reins. And critically, they need high-quality, probing feedback from dedicated mentor teachers who really guide that deep reflective practice. All right, shifting gears to Section 4, Teaching for Inclusion. The philosopher John Dewey beautifully described the core essence of teaching as having insight into soul action. To break that down a bit, it essentially means a teacher's ability to truly attune to a student's thoughts. For example, it's recognizing that a student is withdrawing not because they lack intelligence, but maybe because of the specific way a question was phrased, or perhaps a bias the teacher didn't even realize they were projecting. It's all about deep empathy and having a profound awareness of how our own habits can either foster or completely squash a student's desire to learn. Taking that philosophy into actual practice, pre-service programs have got to actively challenge the deficiency approach toward marginalized students. That outdated idea that the student is somehow lacking. Instead, preparing modern educators requires targeted, specific training in co-teaching models, differentiated instruction, and universal design strategies. And this is to support diverse academic, social, and physical needs. Because true inclusion in a classroom doesn't just happen magically by putting everyone in the same room. It requires explicitly trained pedagogical approaches. This leads us right into Section 5, Continuous Professional Development. Educational researcher John Hattie conducted this absolutely massive meta-analysis of over 800 studies, and it reveals one singular, undeniable truth. Teacher quality is the ultimate driver of student achievement. I mean, think about the magnitude of that for a second. An analysis of 800 separate pieces of research proves that the effectiveness of the teacher sitting in the room completely surpasses almost any other structural or institutional variable. We're talking bigger impacts than school funding models or even class sizes. Because of this massive impact, professional growth simply cannot hit a brick wall at graduation. And because short-term, one-off workshops have proven to be largely useless at changing long-term teaching habits, successful education systems are shifting gears. They're moving toward long-term professional learning communities, or PLCs. These are collaborative networks that build up teachers' self-efficacy by allowing educators to constantly share best practices, engage in peer mentoring, and collectively solve problems together. This continuous feedback loop directly and measurably improves classroom outcomes over time. Which brings us to our final stop, Section 6, a lifelong learning continuum. So to prevent teacher burnout and bridge that incredibly daunting gap between pre-service training and in-service teaching, policymakers really must step in with major structural support. They have to align national deployment strategies to put teachers where they are most needed and supported. They've got to offer robust monetary and educational incentives for those challenging rural posts to attract top-tier talent. And crucially, systems absolutely must fund comprehensive 12-month induction programs. This is to actively mentor and guide new teachers through what is usually the hardest year of their entire careers. As we wrap up this Research Union Explainer, I want to leave you with this somewhat provocative thought. If effective teaching is a lifelong continuum rather than just a static certification, how must we radically redesign our educational systems to actually support a teacher's never-ending journey? It's a huge question, but a necessary one. Thanks so much for watching, and keep learning.